What if the modern wellness industry has been charging you for supplements and functional foods? Meanwhile, the pharmacy God designed has been sitting in the produce aisle for pennies. What if it has been there the entire time? In Numbers chapter 11, the Israelites wept for 5 specific foods by name. All 5 of them are on this list. One man carried 75 Roman pounds of a biblical plant to a tomb in Jerusalem. That same plant just reduced fasting blood glucose by 46 milligrams per decilitre in a controlled trial. And the vegetable Israel mourned last in that wilderness complaint is backed by 14 randomized controlled trials and a Cochrane review. 10 vegetables that were never lost. They were waiting in the wilderness complaint the whole time. Item 10. Cucumber. When Moses recorded the complaint of the Israelites in Numbers chapter 11, the list they gave him was not abstract. It was not symbolic. It was a grocery list from memory. Cucumbers are named in that list alongside melons and leeks and onions and garlic. The specificity of it tells you something important. These people knew exactly what they had left behind in Egypt. They knew what their bodies were missing. Egypt was one of the largest cucumber-producing regions in the ancient world. This was not a luxury food. It was a staple. It was medicine. The people walking through Sinai understood the difference between the two even when they could not explain the chemistry. The active compound is cucurbitacin B, a bitter triterpenoid that concentrates in the skin and flesh of the cucumber family. It functions like a metabolic moderator inside the body, communicating with the pathways that govern how your cells respond to blood sugar. Cucurbitacin-rich extracts produced significant anti-diabetic activity in an animal model. That research was published in Phytotherapia in 2010. This is early-stage research. This video will not overstate what that means. Animal studies point a direction. They do not confirm a human outcome, but they point a compelling one. That grief in the wilderness was not just about flavor. It was a clinical inventory. 5 plants recorded in a single verse. Numbers 11 still has more to offer. The next item was not mourned in the desert. It was commanded by God in a prophetic bread formula, and modern nutrition is only now catching up to why. Item 9. Millet. The bread the prophet Ezekiel was commanded to make in Ezekiel chapter 4 was not a simple loaf. The ingredient list God gave him was not assembled by accident. Wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and spelt. 6 grains and legumes combined into a single bread. Modern nutritional analysis has confirmed it as nutritionally complete in a way no single grain can match. Millet is the grain on that list the modern Western world has almost entirely abandoned. It disappeared from the Western table when industrialized wheat farming made it economically irrelevant. It took centuries of research for science to begin asking why the ancient world valued it so highly. The active compounds are magnesium and bound phenolics. Magnesium is the mineral your body uses to regulate over 300 enzymatic processes. Bound phenolics are antioxidant compounds that release slowly through digestion rather than flooding the bloodstream all at once. They work like a time-release capsule rather than a single sharp dose. Millet consumption was associated with significantly lower fasting glucose and improved lipid profiles in a randomized controlled trial. Nutrients published that in 2018. Every additional 100 milligrams of magnesium per day was linked to a 19% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. That finding came from a 2011 meta-analysis in diabetes care. The grain Ezekiel baked his bread from was sitting on that number the entire time. Swap 1 serving of processed grain per week for cooked millet. God put it in the prophet's bread formula for a reason. Ezekiel's bread was a commanded formula. But the list of grief in Numbers 11 still has more to give. The next item is one the Israelites named by its Hebrew word in the middle of the desert. Their bodies knew exactly what they had lost. Item 8. Watermelon. In Numbers chapter 11, when the Israelites listed every food their bodies were craving from Egypt, one of the 5 they named was avatachim. That is the Hebrew word that translates to the watermelon and melon family. The Nile Valley was the ancient world's primary melon-producing region. Watermelon had been cultivated there since at least the second millennium before Christ, when the wilderness gave them nothing but manna. The absence of that fruit was specific enough to name out loud. Their bodies knew what they had lost before the science existed to explain why. The active compound is L-citrulline, an amino acid that converts to L-arginine inside the body. L-arginine drives the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide relaxes and widens your blood vessels, taking the pressure off your heart with every single beat. It works the way easing tension off a garden hose reduces the pressure pulsing through it. Aortic, systolic, and diastolic blood pressure dropped significantly. The trial involved obese, hypertensive adults taking 6 grams of L-citrulline from watermelon extract daily for 6 weeks. The American Journal of Hypertension published that in 2012. The Israelites mourned this fruit in the desert because their bodies remembered what it did for them. 3 of the first 4 items on this list came from a single verse of wilderness complaint in Numbers 11. That is still only the foundation. Subscribe now, because what is waiting in items 6 through 1 gets more extraordinary from here. The most surprising item on this list is still ahead. The foundation of Numbers 11 runs all the way into the New Testament. The next item did not appear in a list of grief. It appeared at a tomb. The man who carried it understood its value well enough to bring 75 pounds of it. Item 7. Aloe vera. When Nicodemus arrived at the tomb in John chapter 19, he had not come with a small gesture. He was there to help Joseph of Arimathea prepare the body of Jesus for burial. He brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes weighing 75 Roman pounds. That is approximately 34 kilograms of medicinal compound, carried to a garden tomb in the hours after the crucifixion. That is the largest single medicinal quantity named anywhere in the New Testament. The men who carried it understood exactly what they had in their hands. Aloe was medicine across the ancient Near East, documented in Egyptian medical papyri, and traded along the same routes as frankincense. It was present in Solomon's garden in the Song of Solomon, chapter 4. The active compound is acemannan, a long-chain polysaccharide. A 2015 study in the Journal of Diabetes and Metabolic Disorders found it works as a digestive regulator. It slows the rate at which glucose enters the bloodstream after eating. Oral aloe vera reduced fasting blood glucose by 46.6 milligrams per decilitre over 8 weeks. 2 tablespoons of pure food-grade aloe vera gel in water each morning. What Nicodemus carried to the tomb that evening was not sentiment, it was knowledge. 75 pounds of it tells you how seriously the ancient world took what it knew. 75 pounds of medicinal compound carried to a tomb. The next item did not go to a tomb. It went to a king in exile. The men who sent it knew exactly what a body running on nothing needs to keep functioning. Item 6. Fava beans. In 2 Samuel chapter 17, David had fled Jerusalem during Absalom's rebellion and arrived exhausted in Mahanaim. The people who came out to meet him brought food. The list is precise enough to read like a field medic's supply inventory. Wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, and lentils. The beans in that list are fava beans. David was not the only biblical figure who encountered them. Ezekiel chapter 4 names them in the bread formula alongside wheat, barley, millet, spelt, and lentils. These were the beans of the ancient world, eaten across the entire Mediterranean and Levant for thousands of years. The modern food system replaced them with crops easier to process and ship. The active compound is L-dopa, alongside a high concentration of resistant starch. L-dopa is a natural compound the body uses to produce the neurotransmitters governing neurological function, movement, and mood. Resistant starch is precision fertilizer for your gut. It feeds only the bacterial strains governing your immune system and your metabolism, leaving everything else starved. Fava beans provided clinically significant levels of L-dopa. The Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine confirmed that in 2002. The men who brought these to David in exile were feeding a king whose body needed to function under pressure. They knew exactly what they were carrying. Fava beans went to a king in exile. The next grain did not go to a king. It survived a plague. And the text names it separately from wheat because the distinction mattered enough to record. Item 5. Spelt. In Exodus chapter 9, the plague of hail came down on Egypt with a ferocity the text describes as unlike anything that had fallen on the land since it became a nation. Flax was destroyed. Barley was destroyed. But the spelt survived because it was not yet grown up. The text names it specifically and separately from wheat. Spelt is an older variety, cultivated in the Near East since at least 5000 BC. It appears again in Ezekiel chapter 4 in the bread formula alongside millet, barley, and beans. The grain that survived the plague of hail and fed the prophets bread is not the same grain filling supermarket shelves today. The active compounds are arabinoxalan and resistant starch. Arabinoxalan is a selective irrigation system for your gut. It delivers nutrients to the bacterial communities responsible for immune regulation and metabolic function while bypassing the ones you do not want fed. Resistant starch bypasses digestion in the small intestine and arrives intact in the colon. There it becomes fuel for the microbial communities regulating inflammation and blood sugar response. Spelt carries significantly higher antioxidant capacity than modern bread wheat. Food chemistry confirmed that in 2017. Genuine whole grain spelt bread or spelt flour used in home baking as a direct replacement for modern wheat. The grain that outlasted the plague is still available. Most people have simply stopped reaching for it. The grain that survived a plague is still sitting on the shelf. The next item survived something quieter than a plague. It survived being ignored. It is in that same Numbers 11 list, named alongside cucumbers and melons and onions and garlic, and the modern world has been cooking with it for centuries without knowing what it actually does. Item 4. Leek. The leek is in the Numbers, chapter 11 list the Israelites recited in the wilderness. It is named alongside cucumbers, melons, onions, and garlic, in a catalog of grief that turns out to be a clinical inventory. Most people treat it as a background flavor in soup and move on. What the ancient world understood, and what the modern world has largely failed to communicate, is this. The leek carries one of the most targeted anti-inflammatory compounds in the entire vegetable kingdom. The research confirming it is less than a decade old. The active compound is kaempferol, a flavonoid that operates inside your cells like a precise shutdown command for a specific control panel. That control panel is the NF-κB pathway. When it gets stuck in the on position, it drives the slow invisible fire behind joint deterioration, cardiovascular disease, and accelerated cellular aging. Kaempferol helps turn it off. Kaempferol inhibited NF-κB inflammatory signaling significantly in human cell lines. That finding was published in Molecular Nutrition and Food Research in 2016. Separate population research has associated high kaempferol intake with reduced cardiovascular mortality across multiple large cohort studies. 2 large leeks per week cooked into soups or roasted alongside other vegetables. The Israelites wept for leeks in the desert. They understood something about this plant that most people cooking with it today have no idea about. The leek was in the wilderness list. The next plant was not in a list of grief or a bread formula or a field medic's supply. It was in the field of a sluggard. Solomon walked right past it. Item 3. Nettle. In Proverbs chapter 24, verse 31, Solomon describes walking past the field of a lazy man and seeing nettles covering the face of it. Thorns in the garden, the wall broken down, the whole place overtaken by a weed. In Job chapter 30, in one of the most desolate verses in a book full of desolation, Job describes outcasts sheltering under nettles because they have nowhere else to go. In both passages, the nettle is a symbol of neglect, poverty, and abandonment. It is what takes over when no one is tending what should be tended. That is its entire biblical identity, which makes what happens when you cook it one of the most complete reversals on this list. The active compounds are urticidin and scopoletin. Urticidin enters inflamed tissue and moderates the signaling between immune cells that is driving the destruction. Scopoletin works the same inflammatory system from a different angle, reducing the specific molecules the immune system releases when it attacks its own joints. Nettle leaf extract in rheumatoid arthritis, patients reduced TNF-alpha and IL-1B with effects comparable to diclofenac. Diclofenac is a prescription anti-inflammatory. That was a pilot study published in Phytomedicine in 2009. Dried nettle tea steeped for 10 minutes, or cooked nettle leaves used exactly as you would use spinach. Heat fully deactivates the sting. The weed of neglect and poverty matches a pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory. Solomon walked right past it. Solomon walked past the nettle. The next plant is one the Israelites stood in the desert and wept for by name. It is the fourth from that Numbers 11 list, and the one most people eat without any idea what it is doing for them while it is there. Item 2. Onion. 4 of the 5 vegetables from the wilderness complaint in Numbers 11 have appeared on this list. The pattern has been building since item 10. The Israelites standing in Sinai were not just homesick. They were describing a specific nutritional profile their bodies had been running on in Egypt. The manna alone was not providing it. Onion is the 4th of those 5 named foods. It is the one most people eat every single day without any awareness of what its active compounds are doing to their cardiovascular system. The active compounds are quercetin and organosulfur compounds. Quercetin is a flavonoid that moves through the bloodstream like a pressure management system. It communicates with the smooth muscle cells in arterial walls. This helps them relax, so blood flows with less resistance. Organosulfur compounds work alongside it. Research has associated them with reduced platelet aggregation, the clumping process behind the blockages that drive the majority of strokes and heart attacks. Hypertensive patients received 162 milligrams of quercetin per day for 6 weeks. Systolic blood pressure dropped by 3.6 millimeters of mercury. That controlled trial was published in the British Journal of Nutrition in 2013. A medium onion cooked into a meal provides approximately 35 to 50 milligrams of quercetin. Eat 2 or 3 per week. You are working with the same compound the Israelites were eating in Egypt when their bodies were at their best. 4 from Numbers 11 have come and gone. The 5th is the last word on that list. The Israelites saved it for the end. So did this video. Item 1. Garlic. The last word in Numbers chapter 11's list of everything the Israelites left behind in Egypt is garlic. Not the first word. Not the most elaborate. The final one on the list, a grieving people recited in the desert to Moses. In the centuries since that complaint was recorded, no culinary plant has accumulated more peer-reviewed clinical evidence than the one Moses wrote down as the last item his people wept for in the wilderness. The rabbis who studied that passage did not think this was accidental. The Talmudic tradition held that garlic strengthened the body and warmed the organs. They were working from observation. The modern literature is working from randomized controlled trials and arriving at the same place. The active compound is allicin. It forms the moment a clove is crushed or chopped, when 2 previously separated molecules collide. The Cochrane Review's analysis found it works inside the cardiovascular system as a compound linked to reduced arterial pressure. Separate research has linked it to lower inflammatory markers associated with long-term vascular damage. 14 randomized controlled trials. Systolic blood pressure dropped by an average of 4.6 millimeters of mercury across them. The Cochrane Review published that analysis in 2016. Crush 1 or 2 raw cloves. Let them sit for 10 minutes to allow allicin to form fully. Then add them to food. God ended that wilderness list with garlic. The Cochrane Review confirmed it was the right place to end. In Numbers chapter 11, verse 5, the Israelites said, "We remember the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic." 5 plants. One verse of complaint from people who were hungry and frightened and far from home. Cucumber, watermelon, leek, onion, garlic. 5 of the 10 items on this list live inside that single breath of Scripture. God did not lead His people out of Egypt and into the wilderness without first giving them a pharmacy. He put it in the garden before He gave them the law. He put it there before He showed them the promised land. The other 5 items on this list were there too. Millet and spelt in a prophet's bread. Aloe vera carried to a tomb. Fava beans sent to a king in exile. Even a weed from a sluggard's field that matches a prescription anti-inflammatory. The pattern underneath all of it is not coincidence. These are vegetables with thousands of years of documented use and peer-reviewed clinical research standing behind them, not medical prescriptions, and a thoughtful person treats them as exactly that. But what the Israelites knew in their bodies in the wilderness, what Nicodemus carried to the tomb, what Ezekiel baked into his bread, that knowledge was never lost. It was always in the text. We simply forgot to read it that way. Tell me in the comments which of these 10 vegetables you already eat every day and which one surprised you most. If this changed how you read Numbers 11, subscribe. Returning this knowledge to the people it belongs to is what this channel is here for. Next video, 7 grains in Scripture that modern nutrition has abandoned. One of them survived a biblical plague intact. The clinical research behind it will change what you put in your bread. You will want to see that.